All right, so this is video 2, continuation from where we left off. We left off on the Truman Doctrine. Again, just going to recap a little bit. There was basically civil wars going on in Turkey and Greece where you had communist rebels trying to overthrow the governments there. So Truman had, either A, you could be all talk and say, we're going to contain, but you eventually need to prove it. So it's like that bully. Eventually, at some point, you keep bullying people because you're bigger, but eventually, at some point, somebody's going to stand up to you, and you have to be able to kind of prove yourself. So same thing goes for Truman. He's going to talk very tough, tries to stand up to the Soviet Union, but now here's his chance to prove it and show the Soviet Union that, hey, he's willing to allocate money and resources to stop these rebels across the world from trying to overthrow governments that are democratically based. So that became known as the Truman Doctrine, his pledge to help out countries that are in need of democratic support. All right, so there's that. Now the Marshall Plan. President Truman feared poverty. He believed poverty was the biggest obstacle and biggest threat to the world because ultimately countries that are in poverty tend to turn to communism. So his thought is, okay, well, World War II just happened. You have European countries that are in poverty, that are trying to rebuild. You had a loss of life. Millions of people die in World War II. You also have cities destroyed. So the plan is that, well, if we give these countries money, roughly $18 billion in aid. Oops, sorry, guys. $18 billion in aid to, let me see, who is that? All right, there we go. $18 billion in aid to help these countries out, whoever wanted it in Europe, to help them rebuild, to create jobs, to build bridges, to build roads, to build schools, to build hospitals, to build whatever, to create more job opportunities in these areas. So ultimately, this was kind of a way to prevent communism from spreading. If countries weren't going into poverty, this was a way for it to help. So this became known as Marshall. So here's something that I always thought of. Think of Marshall money. Money Marshall, MM. To prevent communism from spreading, we give countries money to help them rebuild. Roughly about $18 billion or so. So obviously you're seeing a trend. We're becoming much more involved in the world now. Whereas after World War I, we became very isolated. So notice the shift in U.S. policy, going from being isolated after World War I to now being very involved in after World War II. All right, so again, going back to Germany, here's how Germany was split up into 4 zones. I guess you can really argue it was really 2. So you have the Eastern zone. So think of here's North, here's South, here's your East, here's your West. Eastern zone was the Russian zone, Soviet zone. This is the zone that this orange will be communist. So notice Berlin is located there. It's the capital of Germany. So this is going to be a communist zone here. Again, a big part of what Stalin wanted was he wanted to spread communism. So he got that. But he also wanted that buffer zone. So here's the Soviet Union's over on this side. So he wants that buffer zone. Here's Poland right there, and Soviet Union's on a little further east. And then this side was, I guess you can call it the Western zone, was split up between the British, French, and American. This was democratic, capitalist based. So notice Germany's it's split basically. You have one part of it that's communist, the other part is democratic and capitalist. So Soviets will control the East, U.S., Britain, and France control the West. All right, so eventually this is going to lead down to a showdown. So here's the same thing. Here's East Germany. This is Soviet Union right here. These 3 are going to be hold on, guys. Sorry, my kids are knocking on the door. These 3 are going to be the green, the blue, and the yellow is going to be the Western zone of Germany. So what ends up happening is this, and you'll see this in the video, but eventually you see something that happens in Berlin. Again, Berlin is located in East Germany, but notice too that not only is Germany split, but so is Berlin. So here's a zoomed in picture of Berlin right here. So East Berlin, same thing as East Germany, is Soviet controlled. West Germany, West Berlin is split up into the same 3 zones. But here's the advantage that the Soviets have, is that Berlin is located in their sector. It's in their zone. So what ended up happening is in 1948, in June, you have on the Western zone, essentially Britain, France, and the United States basically combined into one zone. they basically team up and they create this one common currency called the Deutschmark. Same common currency for all three of those zones. And Stalin takes that as a threat, essentially, that basically, hey, it's 3 versus 1, it's democratically based, they have one common currency, one form of government, versus just us. So what he does is he tries to pull a power play on the Americans, British, and French by saying, okay, if you're going to do that, then I want Berlin to myself because it's in my territory. I want you guys to leave and leave me this area. So what he does is he closes access into West Berlin. He closes all roads, all ports, all rivers, railroads, you name it. He shuts them down. His goal is eventually to say, hey, is the United States, Britain, France, are they willing to risk another war? Are they going to invade over West Berlin? He's kind of testing them, and he's hoping that the answer is going to be no. But Truman's under some pressure. He's like, well, what do? Do you just give Berlin to the Soviets? And if you do that, that's going to perceive you as being weak. Stalin's trying to test you, essentially. So what can you do that would prevent war, but yet become the hero of the situation? Well, Truman had this idea of, well, why don't we do an airlift? Why don't we fly from West Germany in our sector? We'll fly airplanes into West Germany, drop off medicine and food and water supplies into these areas. Because Stalin cuts them off. He shuts off all electric, all water into that area. So now Truman is also making the same thing. Is Stalin willing to risk war? Is he going to shoot down the planes? If he shoots down the planes, that causes a war. So he's testing Stalin in the same regard. Stalin is not going to shoot down the planes, and for over a year, as this blockade's going on, we keep flying in thousands of missions into West Berlin, dropping off food and supplies, medicines, and that thing into West Berlin. Now think about how that's going to repair or affect U.S. and German relations, guys. 3 years previously, we were fighting World War II against them. But now we look like the heroes. We're coming in and we're saving these West Berliners. We're helping them and make Stalin look bad. So after about a year, in May of 1949, the Soviet Union and Stalin will admit defeat, that they're going to lift the blockade, that they aren't going to get West Berlin, the Americans aren't going to budge, and that's known as the Berlin Airlift, as you'll see in the Edpuzzle here in a little bit. All right, so you see here's we're dropping off chocolate to the kids. So again, good PR move to make us look good. They were known as like the chocolate droppers or the candy droppers. They have little parachutes and candy bars and drop them over the side, kids. And then you have, okay, so then in the late 40s, you have alliances that are going to be set up again. So NATO was formed. Guys, NATO is still around today. It's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That's what NATO stands for. In 1949, the Western nations formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So there's America, Belgium, Britain, Canada, Denmark, France. So all these Western European powers, they form an alliance, an anti-communist alliance called as NATO. And again, this is still around today. It's still a pretty powerful group that's still around today that protects each other's interests, defends each other, etc. So in retaliation, the Soviets are going to form their own alliance of communist nations called the Warsaw Pact. So this is a communist organization, a communist alliance. You have Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Soviet Union, etc. that will be a part of the Warsaw Pact. And I guess you'll see in the Edpuzzle, the arms race. What is the arms race? We know it's not arms and muscles and that kind of thing. Arms race means weapons. So when we dropped the atom bomb in World War II on Japan, countries now are going to race to develop weapons that are equal to and develop nuclear weapons. So by 1949, the Soviet Union, they developed their own nuclear weapon, their own atom bomb. Now, how did they get it so fast? We knew eventually at some point they were going to develop it. We didn't think it would be 1949. How did they develop it? Spies. They had spies that were in the Manhattan Project that allowed them the ability to create it so fast. So once they developed the A-bomb, now we're equal. We can't be we no longer have it anymore where we can hold it over their heads. Like, they have one too. They're now equally as dangerous as us. So that's where it's going to kind of even the playing field. That's where the threat gets really real. And then eventually we developed the hydrogen bomb, also known as the H-bomb, in 1952. They'll develop one as well. So in the first stages of the war, we're developing technology faster than them. We're more technology advanced. But as you'll notice in the next couple of lectures, that by the 60s, the Soviet Union, you can argue, is caught up or has surpassed us, which becomes a pretty scary thing. All right, so the Korean War, this is what your assignment is going to be about. The Korean War, sorry, we're making hard-boiled eggs for the kids. All right, there we go. The Korean War, this was the first major war of the United States after World War II. And you guys are going to be completing a worksheet on this in terms of understanding the history behind this. But essentially, Japan loses World War II, and they have to give up their colony of Korea. So the containment all plays an effect of this, is that we don't want to give it to the Soviets because of communism spreading, and they don't want to give it to us, so we split it. We split it at the 38th parallel. That's the line of latitude that we'll use the 30th parallel. North of it will be North Korea. That'll be Soviet-controlled, communist. South of this line will be South Korea, will be U.S. democratically controlled. Now, this is still today exactly how it is. This was all done by foreign powers. It was all dictated. So we essentially took Korea, which was once one united country, and we split them up. Again, so that's why some of the tension to this very day exists, because we basically, us, Soviet Union, foreign powers came in, imperialists, and we kind of just divided the country. So again, you see on the slide here, Russia controls the north, we control the south. All right, so Cold War becomes hot. So long story short, North Korea is going to invade South Korea. They're going to try to unite the country, turn the whole state communist. The U.S. did not want another country to become communist, so this is where we're going to send in U.S. and UN forces will come in and help defend South Korea. So June 27th, 1950, the UN members will meet and will support South Korea. General Douglas MacArthur, we talked about him during World War II. He's going to be the leader of UN forces who's going to come into South Korea and help out and basically defend South Korea. We'll talk more about him in a little bit. So notice, North Korea, they invade South Korea, and look how far they get. They get basically way past 30th parallel, and they get very down to this corner. So they are moving. They're conquering a lot of land. Look, at first it looks like we're going to be in some deep doo-doo. But then look what happens. Once UN and forces get there, and American forces, Douglas MacArthur, we push the North Koreans back up basically to the Chinese border, to the Yalu River. And this is where China gets involved. The Chinese are going to send in tens of thousands of soldiers because they're going to feel threatened by American forces. At this point, China turns communist in 1949. They don't want the Americans getting close to the Yalu River. They take this as basically as a threat, so that they pour a bunch of soldiers in to help out the North Koreans. So now the Chinese get involved. So that's kind of what you said. So once the Chinese get involved, they push the Americans past, and the UN forces past the 30th parallel. Hi, Scarlett. And then so they get past Seoul. So now you see the pink line now. This is where the new war is, the new line. So now they're advancing. They're winning. So notice, 3 years of fighting. 3 years of fighting. Now look where the line is. It basically ends up where it started. It started off at 30th parallel, and look what 3 years later, it's at 30th parallel. So after 3 years of fighting, they're like, okay, well, why keep doing this? This is 3 years of 3 years of war, tens of thousands of lives lost. They agreed to a ceasefire agreement. Now, no treaty was ever signed. This was just a ceasefire agreement. So technically, guys, right now in 2020, technically the Korean War is still ongoing. There was never a treaty signed, just a ceasefire. So technically it never ended. So MacArthur wanted, at this point, he disagreed with President Eisenhower. So Truman now is no longer the president. You have President Eisenhower. MacArthur wanted to attack China. He wanted to expand the war into China now. But Truman and Eisenhower are both going to disagree with that. And MacArthur's going to lose his job because he basically speaks publicly against Truman in the papers, defying his commander-in-chief, his boss, publicly. Not a good look. So he'll get fired. So the end of the Korean War, after 3 years of fighting, two countries will remain divided, separated at the 30th parallel. So to this very day, North Korea is communist and South Korea is capitalist. And here's the casualties. As you guys can see, some of the money that was spent and casualties and deaths. You guys go to DC, you'll see the monument. All right, so anyways, that's it for the lecture today. Have a good day. That's going to be it for the week.